Josh, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with Movers and Shakers today. First and foremost, can you talk a bit about the film in that I had an opportunity to see it and the just the idea of what the fascination is with this story because I feel like it's something just intrinsically about human nature that we just find fascinating about this will. So could you comment on that further?
Yeah, that's actually yeah, that's actually kind of what led me to this whole story. I was pitching people. I had read the article in the New York Times, and it kind of affected me. And I was like, "Hey, have you heard the story of this lonely whale?" To people, and when I told people the story, they freaked out. They would cry or they would get goosebumps or like they would grab my hand and be like, "Tell me more." And that was really fascinating as a storyteller to elicit that reaction. And I wanted to know why people got so emotional, why they kind of connected with the story. And like, okay, is it the loneliness issue, and we're all going through what's called an epidemic of loneliness, and is that based upon social media or changing of nuclear families? Like there was that whole original thing, but then it was like when you add in this idea of a whale, for some reason it kind of supersized the whole reaction. And so it was really kind of picking that apart and then figuring out, well, what is it about whales? Like, why do people get so emotional? Why do people always remember the first time they saw a whale? What is it about this creature that elicits this reaction inside of us?
Absolutely, absolutely. And to speak further about that, just that what I found fascinating as well is in an indirect way, what you discovered regarding those frequencies and our history, with our relationship with the ocean, with the water, and how other elements came into play that you didn't really foresee, with all of the other, I guess you could say, the classified elements that were
Yeah.
involved. So can you talk about that and kind of opening that bag of worms of having that you know, uh, come as a an unexpected discovery, in the course of this story as you were, learning more about this will.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was first of all, it was kind of like, oh, interesting that they heard this sound through this thing called the SOSIS system, this
Right.
unclassified system of hydrophones that we have in the oceans that we developed during the Cold War. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. Like, what is this? And it was, in some ways, it was like this just a weird juxtaposition of this lonely, cute whale and this classified Navy experience. And I was like, okay, well, this is very interesting. It's like a real, you know, kind of a weird dichotomy of these two things. And I discovered that, and not a lot of people know about it. It's like this weird open secret that there is basically in the 1950s, they developed this series of hydrophones, listening devices that they put in the oceans all over the world to basically track Russian submarines. This was at the height of the Cold War. Submarines were obviously a huge thing. And, when the Berlin Wall fell, they then opened that program up to scientists, and scientists were able to track whale populations by listening to the number of calls out there. And I was like, oh, that's so fascinating and so cool. And I was like, I wonder if we can use that. I wonder if we could hear 52 again. And so I went to the Navy, and what I didn't know is that in a lot of ways, the Cold War has restarted again. Uh, with basically the melting of the polar ice cap, there's a whole new battlefield in terms of submarine warfare, and the Chinese are developing really highly sensitive submarines, and Russians, of course. And so, like, while we're in the middle of making this film, the Navy is suddenly getting more and more like secretive and freaked out about stuff until the point where literally they shut us totally down for a while there. It was even interesting. I was like, well, can we listen to 52? And they're like, well, that's a complicated thing. I was like, well, why? I mean, you know what it sounded like before. And they're like, no, like, we can't just give you the data. We have to hire somebody with classified access like literally like
Right.
classified like level 3 access, who can then listen and filter out the Chinese, Russian, and our submarines and those signatures. Like that's classified data to see if there's a whale underneath it all. I was like, this is ridiculous, you know. And I was trying to ask the Navy. I was like, this would be really good PR for you to like help find this lonely whale, and they kind of weren't having any of that. And so at some point, we got to NOAA, which is a government organization, and they were helping us, going through and creating these algorithms and scrubbing through the data. But then they got totally shut off by the government, and we had to turn and rely on civilian hydrophones. A bunch of number of organizations like Scripps have their own hydrophones throughout the oceans, but it was just I was like, really? There's this whole network of surveillance, and it's like guys literally who like look at sheets of paper all day long for like signatures of submarines. It's totally cool.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one question I realized that I did want to ask you as well is in talking about again that fascination, that intrinsic, I feel, fascination that we have in terms of our human nature of being social and having that empathy. Uh, you had some great supporters in getting champion this film and getting this film, helping to get this film made. And I understand DiCaprio was a major component of that. So can you
Yeah.
talk a bit about that process of getting those supporters and getting those folks that championed the film?
Sure. So originally, I was working with a producer who knew Adrian Grenier, and Adrian was, I think, just finishing Entourage and was a real ocean steward. He's an environmental guy and like really wanted to help. And I think he recognized what you were saying, the kind of the empathy that this lonely whale, this idea of a lonely whale, was a really emotionally grabbing storyline. And he's like, this is really good. And so he was like, okay, I'll help you with your Kickstarter. We also want to take this idea of the lonely whale and use it for an ocean stewardship organization. I was like, oh, absolutely. Like, we should totally, use everything we can to get people to care about the oceans. And so he went off and made this very successful organization called the Lonely Whale Organization. At the same time, we launched a Kickstarter and to help us go out on this expedition, because it was funny. We would speak to a whole bunch of like studio execs and streamers, and we're like, okay, we want to go on this expedition to find the whale. And they're like, well, what's your ending going to be? I was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, can you guarantee that we can find the whale? And I was like,
Right.
no, I can't guarantee that we can find